So we're celebrating AATCC's 100th anniversary with a tour of the AATCC Technical Center and some of the historic exhibits at the center. We're starting here in the council room where we have the wall of presidents, actually 2 walls of presidents. These are all of the AATCC presidents since the beginning in 1921. The last 2 you can see we've finally moved to color. So the last picture on there is Harry Scotes, the current AATCC president. The council room is our largest meeting area, and we do use it for board meetings, other large meetings, and it is available for members to use as well. From here we can move into the library where a number of exhibits are set up. This is a portrait of the AATCC founder, Mr. Louis Olney. And along with that, we have historic books, a picture of where the original AATCC meetings were held. We actually have all of the charter member applications including Mr. Olney's himself. So these were the membership applications, and there were quite a few to get started. We have some information about AATCC committee meetings, some pictures as well as minutes from throughout the decades, additional information about the conferences that have been held at AATCC. So we have the proceedings for many of those conferences as well as some of the programs and just some different memorabilia from the conferences. Maybe one of the most interesting things for the golden anniversary, the 50-year anniversary in 1971, there is a telegram here from President Nixon. So we weren't able to get the president to send us greetings this time for the 100th anniversary. Color has always been a big part of what AATCC does, so we have quite a few books on color, reference materials, things like that. A large collection of sample books, which are really neat because you can see the actual samples of fabrics that were used throughout the years. So these are just a few of the most interesting and some of the oldest ones, but we've really got a huge collection of those for those that are interested. This section is dedicated to some of AATCC's corporate members and partners. So SDC is an organization headquartered in the UK that has worked really closely with AATCC throughout the years. You can see our charter and an illuminated presentation scroll there. Part of what AATCC does with SDC is publish the color index. And so we have volumes of the color index as well as a plate commemorating the partnership and some of the other plaques that you see here are also for various corporate members. And ASTM is of course one of our corporate members. ASTM D13 and AATCC have partnered to publish several documents including those technical supplements that you see on the shelf. And AATCC provides the ASTM volumes as well as the AATCC volumes. As we come around to the other side, this display is dedicated to the Olney Medal, which was of course named after founder Louis Olney. The 2 medals that you actually see displayed there are 2 that were awarded to a father and son on completely separate occasions, but Roland Derby and Roland Derby Jr. both earned the medal, and those are on display. And then we've got pictures of some of the more recent award recipients. In the bottom part of the case, there's some information. Unfortunately, Louis Olney died tragically along with his wife in a car accident, and there was quite a to-do when he died. The House Publishing Company had a declaration about that. There were several AATCC members that served as pallbearers, and there was some interesting correspondence back and forth from an A.R. Thompson. And so I was curious about who this A.R. Thompson was and did a little bit of digging. He was a Chapin Award winner. He didn't win the Olney Award, but he won the Chapin Award. He was also the treasurer of the association and the secretary. He wasn't quite a founding member because he was a student at the time that AATCC was founded in 1921, but he was a student of Louis Olney, so he was involved in AATCC from the very beginning, and he felt really strongly when Olney died that the Lowell Textile School where he taught should have actually closed for the day of his funeral, and so that's what some of the correspondence is about. As we go along this wall, these are the publications that AATCC actually produces. So starting with the technical manual, and the gold and black book is very familiar to most people, but it actually started in all kinds of other colors and then settled to the standard gold and black look. It is published in Mandarin Chinese as well as in English. And we have the AATCC Journal. So early on, the AATCC proceedings were published in American Dye Stuff Reporter, and these are all bound here. These are also available online from the AATCC website. They've all been scanned and made available electronically. Eventually, AATCC started publishing its own magazine, so that's where Textile Chemist and Colorist came in. Eventually, the two were merged into Textile Chemist and Colorist and American Dye Stuff Reporter, and that was way too much of a mouthful for anybody, and so we went to the simpler title AATCC Review, and that's what's still published today, and so we have the most recent copies of AATCC Review here. These will eventually be bound along with the rest of the volumes. A couple of years ago, the peer-reviewed journal section was actually carved out of the magazine, and so now that's published separately as the AATCC Journal of Research, and that's also online as well as having a few print copies. And then we have proceedings from various conferences that have been held throughout the years, everything from infrared to computer technology and color. And then just a handful of books that AATCC has published. Some of the first of those being the Analytical Methods book, and we'll see a little bit more about the publications when we go downstairs to the publications department. Then we'll pass through here to the laboratories. These are the plaques commemorating all of our Olney medalists. So as you see, the laboratory is named for George Mendicos, and there's actually a plaque down here, probably an awkward way to do it, that really commemorates his contributions to the AATCC and the importance of him in coming down to Research Triangle Park to be part of AATCC. So this is a working laboratory. We do require that people wear safety goggles and other PPE. The first section here is our wet lab. So we have washing machines, which are actually incredibly important in textile testing. So we have standard washing and drying. We have some spectrophotometers, including a brand new one that was just donated by Data Color. We also have one from X-Ray. A lot of the equipment in the laboratory is donated by some of our corporate members, so we're very thankful to have a fully equipped lab thanks to some of those donations. So in addition to the laundering and the color measurement, there's a lot of wet testing that comes in here, so light fastness testing, accelerated laundering, and then water resistance, water repellency, and some moisture management tests kind of around the perimeter here. As we move in, this is our chemical laboratory, and so we do have a hood and all the accompanying glassware to do various chemical tests. One of AATCC's most recent publications is AATCC Test Method 212, Fiber Fragment Release during Home Laundering, and so the wash water from an accelerated laundering test is actually filtered through a very fine filter to see the amount of fiber fragments, or what some people call microfibers, is left. So that's what this setup is for. Around the perimeter of the room we have test methods for dimensional stability, for crocking, some additional moisture management tests. Microscopes and melt point apparatus let us look at fibers and identify the type of fiber that's being used. And then we have some other equipment for scorch testing, color fastness to everything water and perspiration, color fastness to gas fumes is this instrument in the corner. And then the last laboratory has more of our physical testing. So a lot of these test methods are not actually AATCC test methods, but ASTM or ISO test methods for physical testing. The Martindale abrasion tester is actually used for one AATCC procedure. It's a transfer of free permethrin, and so rather than actually looking at the abrasion on the fabric, it looks to see how much of the permethrin finish is transferred off of the fabric. And then the other tests around the corner are mainly for abrasion and pilling resistance. We've got some tear testers, a burst tester, and some random tumble pilling. So this is kind of a nice comparison. This is the old style Mullen burst tester, and then a brand new one with all the appropriate safety mechanisms and controls so that you don't end up covered in hydraulic fluid like you used to. We can do tensile testing and compression on this instrument, and yet another moisture management tester here. These are all connected to the computer. Some analytical testing. We can characterize fabric by weight, by count, by thickness, things like that. Recovery angle to look at the wrinkle recovery or the flexibility of the fabric. And here we have vapor transmission of textiles. So the top plate is actually not in place there, but jars of water are suspended over a warm water bath to see how much of that water actually passes through the fabric, and that gives us an indication of how vapor permeable a fabric would be. So that idea of letting your perspiration escape even while maybe keeping the rainwater out. And in this quarter we do have some testing for electronic textiles, which is another area that AATCC has kind of just gotten into in the last few years. And we'll just kind of circle around part of the perimeter of the building. You can see AATCC sits on about 10 acres of land here in Research Triangle Park. So we've got a beautiful view. We'll go out in a little bit and see the sundial, but from here you can actually get a little bit closer look at the dye garden. It's ready for winter right now, but we've managed to establish indigo plants as well as false indigo plants. And this is my office. We've given it a dye theme, and so over on the wall we have a large painting of William Henry Perkin, who was the gentleman who first discovered synthetic dyes. And then a few other art pieces that have been donated by friends and members of the association over the years. Some of them have really interesting historic background. Others are just interesting pictures or attractive pictures. And then around this side, so a few more pictures, kind of a comic strip actually regarding dye. And a portrait of William Henry Perkin and his family when they came to visit AATCC. And so a few other things celebrating William Henry Perkin. You can see everything has this mauve purple tint to it because that was the color that he first discovered. So that's kind of the way that we celebrate. Most recently, the 150th anniversary of his discovery. The AATCC conference was celebrated. The gentlemen wore purple bow ties and the ladies carried purple purses. We have a few other items here that we don't put fully on display just because we don't want to expose them unnecessarily to light. But we have a sample of dye that was the first dye to be standardized on a spectrophotometer. We also have several different dye samples that came out of the recent time capsule, and we also have spectrophotometer readings on all of these. Maybe one of the most interesting dyes stories that we have here is a collection of dyes from Germany. And so there's several different samples of these, and the background reads that prior to World War I, German chemists studied at a well-known New England university, and many dyes and chemical samples were provided them by Badisch Analytical for their use in research. During the war, German students were sent home or interned. The samples presumably were shelved and remained so for many years. In 1937, a graduate student at the same university who was studying dye synthesis came upon these samples. With World War II brewing, there was a feeling of animosity towards Germans and anything German. The student gained possession of these samples and retained them until he went to work for General Aniline Works in Rensselaer, New York. The year was 1950. In 1978, BASF purchased the Rensselaer plant and through sheer circumstance regained possessions of its dye samples. So they kind of came full circle back to a German company. Okay. So we looked at the only medalists in the other room. These are all of our Chapin Award winners. And then we talked a little bit about the time capsule, and that's a big part of our 100th anniversary. So this first display cabinet here are representatives of the items that went into the new capsule in 2021. It was placed in the ground November 2021. And so some things maybe are not a surprise. We have a few face coverings, which are certainly symbolic of 2021. There are items that were donated by various corporate and individual members of AATCC, so we had a little bit more variety. And then some quintessentially AATCC items, grayscales and things like that. The items underneath and in the next two cabinets are those that came out of the 1964 time capsule. So that was placed in the ground when this technical center was built and dedicated, and there's a picture of that ceremony. Right next to it, there's a really interesting document that commemorates the birds that were seen and heard during the ceremony, as well as those that were common to the area. This is something not quite textile related, but really interesting. We had lots of publications and some samples. There's spectrophotometer readings for all of the fabrics as well as the dyes, different fiber samples, publications, an American flag, again with all of the spectrophotometer readings for the colors of those materials. All right. And then this room is really dedicated to the building itself. So A. Henry Gady was the person that really inspired AATCC to bring its headquarters down to North Carolina to the Research Triangle Park. The association had previously determined that they were going to go to New York when they left the Lowell Textile School. And so instead they ended up here in Research Triangle Park. The pictures on the wall show what the building looked like when it was first built in 1964 and what it looks like today in 2021. So no huge changes, but certainly a lot more trees and maybe a little bit more modern looking furniture. The shovel is the groundbreaking shovel from when this building was first started. And there's a golden key that was presented at the time of the building's dedication. Another interesting thing, when the building was built, it did win an architectural award. So this type of building with the full glass surround was very unusual at the time, and actually won AATCC an award. All right. So you can see more of the AATCC grounds out here, as well as the parking lot. Before we head downstairs, we can take a look at some of these items. These were all donated to AATCC over the years. So the embroidered pictures were all from Amna Rahman, one of AATCC's global trainers from Bangladesh. And so he visited AATCC's Technical Center on several occasions and brought these beautiful embroideries representing his home country. So we have those on display. The rug here was presented in 1984. The wool yarns were provided by one company, and then another company put it together and actually created the rug. And we'll see more of these kinds of gifts and commemorative items as we head downstairs. We can take a quick peek into the color evaluation room. So this is the last laboratory space. It is used for color evaluation with the large light box, as well as appearance evaluation for smoothness, crease retention, and things like that. And so this is used both for testing and evaluation and for teaching. So the lower level of AATCC Technical Center was completed a little bit later. The building was originally dedicated in 1964, and then the lower level was completed in 1969 to house the publications department, which is still down here. So we'll start with that. Some of the books that are published by AATCC, we saw some of these in the library. Here's a few more. Maybe one of the most interesting is this Analytical Methods book, one of the very first books that was published by AATCC in 1949, a second edition in 1968, a third in 1984, and the fourth edition is just about to be published within the next few months. On this wall, we have some information about the periodicals that AATCC has published. As I mentioned up in the library, originally the proceedings were published in American Dye Stuff Reporter, and so for about 50 years that was the AATCC magazine. In 1969, they started publishing Textile Chemist and Colorist, merged into that very succinct Textile Chemist and Colorist and Dye Stuff Reporter, and then eventually AATCC Review. And so these magazines highlight some of the milestones in that conversion. You can see that the nameplate changed a little bit over the years. We eventually pulled out that Journal of Research, and then we have the most recent version. So these stories here kind of talk about what the changes were with each of the issues. And the magazine is not just informative, but is actually an award-winning publication. Over the years, the feature articles have won numerous awards. So this is just a few of them. Maria Thiry, the current AATCC publications director, actually has another 10 or so in her office that she's personally won for her writing. And these are some of the others. Down this hall we see some of the conferences that have been held. So for most of the past 20 years or so, and then in particular the 50-year Jubilee, you can see we've come a long way from producing lots and lots of paper, and of course there was a ladies program as well, which doesn't happen anymore. But And then you can see, we've done all kinds of different conferences, different themes, different colors. And this is just the last, 20 or so years of conferences, but they go back even further. And then this year, 2021, we made it the Textile Discovery Summit, so it has a new name, and you can see we've boiled down the literature to just a single pamphlet. So kind of speaks to the idea of going green and having less disposable waste. And in here, we have our history. So over the years, this room was designated the Institute for the History of Textile Arts and Science. It was set up as a museum. It has also been used as file storage. It has been used as an office. And now we've kind of brought it back to the idea of being a history room. So some really interesting things in here. Along this wall, more gifts and commemorative items that AATCC has received throughout the years. Everything from lab equipment to plaques and artwork. Some really unique pieces that have been given by global members to recognize their particular culture or national artwork. And there's some more rugs that were created specifically for AATCC over the years. And then this board down the bottom is actually really interesting. This was created from covers of AATCC magazines. And it was first mentioned in the magazine in 1996 in honor of the 75th anniversary. And so in there's actually a great story of kind of explaining the ideas and the themes that they were looking to pull out. And then in the center of the room and up on these shelves here is all color evaluation equipment of various types. So dating back well over 50 years, and then some a little bit more recent. Different kinds of equipment. There's some neat stories. If you ever have the opportunity to read a little bit more closely some of the plaques and explanations that are here. This one, Jack Daniels, the previous executive vice president, recalled when we obtained this equipment that he remembered exactly when they obtained it and how that came about. And so little interesting stories and anecdotes for several of those around the building. Head out through the garage area. This is used as just kind of a transportation space. We have also got a display over the last few weeks during the AATCC Week of Celebration. Donors to the AATCC Foundation have put together this tapestry, and so we'll eventually get that up on the wall with a list of the donors that were part of that. And then we're gonna follow this path around to the sundial and take a look at that before going back inside in the front. If you remember the pictures that were up in the Gaiety room, some of these trees were just tiny little twigs in the first set of pictures and have gotten quite a bit larger over the years. A lot of the plantings were donated by various sections when the building was new. In the spring, this area is beautiful. The azaleas turn everything all pink and purple. And this brick walkway was dedicated for the building's 50th anniversary, and once we get over this bridge here, the bricks are actually engraved. Again, donors to the AATCC Foundation that supports scholarships and research grants for students were able to engrave a brick with their name or with a message. There are also bricks engraved for various presidents, staff members, and award winners. So a lot of the important parts of AATCC are captured here in the brick walkway. The sundial itself is dedicated to the founders of AATCC, and their names appear in the plaques around the faces of the sundial. So this area, all of the gray that you see and the plantings are all new. We had this refinished and replanted, especially for this 100th anniversary. So hopefully the plants will get much larger over time. And finally, this is the AATCC time capsule. As we mentioned, the 1964 capsule was pulled out this year, and a new capsule was buried in 2021, and so that will be engraved with the new year. In addition to the items that were shown in the display, everybody who was here for the ceremony had the ability to sign their name to some papers that were included in the time capsule.